Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Midday Western U.S. Regional Forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. I just want to rewind the clock here back to the 29th, 5 a.m. in the morning here, West Coast time, and just to show you how brutally cold these temperatures have been. And when we look back over the month of September and October here, it's going to show up as a very anomalous 45 days or so across much of the Pacific Northwest and over California. Let me show what I mean. I'm going to zoom in right in here to Yakima. So this is right here, Tri-Cities area down here in the Columbia Basin. And what you're looking at here is a graph that shows temperatures going all the way back to the beginning of September through the very end of October. And while we spent much of the month kind of hovering right in here in and around average temperatures, the pattern break that did occur toward the end of September that came and brought in some brutally cold air, kind of in three big shots. We had one at the end of September. This was probably the most devastating to the crops in the area that happened here in the beginning of October, like October 10th, 11th, 12th. And then another big shot of cold air that we've been recently talking about here just to finish out the month of October. It was extremely wet during this time period and then very, very cold after that. And that story repeats itself across much of the Pacific Northwest. Next week I'll be in Boise, but this is here for Idaho Falls. And you can see a very similar thing. We saw in September very warm temperatures, staying well within the normal range. And then as we got into the month of October, look at this, we were setting all-time records for cold temperatures multiple times here in the month of October on Idaho Falls, so the other side of the Snake River Valley. And on Monday I'm actually heading to Salem, and in Salem, same story. I mean, look, we were staying well within normal limits, and then the cold air outbreaks kind of came in. And we have to talk about the pattern that got us here and that has caused so much trouble, because middle of the month of November, I got to head to Montana, and I'm really not looking forward to that discussion, because look at this over the last month, what our temperature anomalies have looked like. And if you come into the state of Montana, where we have been averaging 10 to 12 degrees below average for the whole month. Well, just to put this in perspective, Montana has actually been the coldest place on Earth compared to average when you look back over the last month. And I stopped and I just have to sit here and I have to think, why? What is going on that is causing this pattern? So this is what the pattern has been. It has been one that has featured a ridge that has gone into Alaska and a deep trough that has cut across the Pacific Northwest, lifting into another ridge that's sitting here over Greenland. That's been our average flow pattern. These two ridges, the ones that you see right in through here, keep pinching off colder air that keeps sneaking here, well, basically the epicenter of which right into parts of Montana. And when I start to step back and ask myself, well, what could be causing this? Here's a few things that I want to talk about. One, the warm water we see here. Two, the warm water we see here. And I want to talk about what's going on north of Alaska as well. We've seen in our long-range updates, this is the positive phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And normally when that happens, that tends to push a lot of warm air that actually occupies much of western North America. But with another big ridge sitting here, that has pushed the ridge that's normally sitting, I'll just kind of draw it in a dashed line here, to now be sitting in this area. And that's allowed actually some cold air to sneak into this region. So it's a combination of events here. And then I got to show you this. North of Alaska in the Chukchi Sea, I believe that's how you pronounce it. Please, in the comments, correct me if I'm saying it incorrectly here, okay? The Chukchi Sea, our ice content, sea ice extent is now at record low territory. And therefore the waters in and around Alaska surrounding the entire state are very warm. And that is promoting a pattern that has really caused a lot of problems here for the western United States. I mean, look at this. This was about 4:45 in the morning when I was preparing this briefing here, Central Time, and we had another day where the West was just locked into bitterly cold air due to this same flow pattern. And this is what it looks like. It's split. Strong piece of the Pacific jet coming across the open Pacific, but then it breaks. We have a northern branch here, a southern branch coming in here, and yeah, they meet in the middle part of the United States. But with this big high over low setup, this is a setup that at the lower levels of the atmosphere is driving a wind like this. And that has been what's causing that terrible Santa Ana wind that we've seen, causing all of these fire problems. But it's also stagnated the pattern. With the deeper trough settling in here, all the warmth is off of the coast. And it's a pattern we've had a difficult time shaking. Now, when we look at the all hazards weather map for today, the good news for the West Coast is I don't see any of the red flag warnings. Our fire threat has been diminished. And one of the big reasons for that is because, yes, we do have colder air in place. In fact, you can see we're expecting freezing temperatures. Look down here in Southern California. we have quite a bit of colder air that's going to be in and around like the San Gabriel Mountains. But then in the San Joaquin Valley, as you go up the slopes here over toward the Sierra Nevada, we will have some pockets in there that by the time we get to the coldest hours later on this morning, we'll see some pockets of below freezing temperatures. But even though our humidity levels will remain low, this is what our afternoon humidity levels look like here across the state of California. And again, down here in Southern California, I see a lot of 3s and 4s and 2s in terms of percent of humidity. The very good news is this. Watch this animation. This is wind gusts starting this afternoon, going through the next 60 hours. And what do you not see? We don't see the really, really strong winds that were the main culprit when added to the low relative humidity of driving the fires. So that's why we've backed off. There's no more red flag warnings. We no longer have the intense, critical, extreme fire threat, although things are still very, very dry down in California. So when we think about this, when are we going to break this pattern down? Well, I'm showing you a map here where the reds represent high precipitable water content and the blues represent low precipitable water content. So reds moist, blues dry. And when we look at this map, I've got us all the way out here to Tuesday morning. And what we see is the influence both in the European on the right and the GFS on the left. I'll draw on the European of that flow pattern. You see, we keep taking all this moisture and curling it up here while a larger protective ridge sits and spins in this direction to the south of that. So this is keeping the moisture away. Now with the deeper trough sitting here, we are sliding in these little clipper systems that on the upslope side of the Rocky Mountains, but coming from the east, we are going to be putting down quite a bit of snowfall in this area. I'll show you that in a few moments. But I've been kind of making a case this week that it appears that once we get out past the 9th and the 10th, that these models are advertising a bit of a breakdown. You see that we're shoving the drier air farther to the south in both maps. And we now start to see these ribbons of moisture pushing across the Gulf of Alaska, eventually trying to take aim. Now the GFS model is more aggressive. You can see that it's bringing in that moisture maybe by the 9th or the 10th, whereas the European model over here on the right is still keeping it a bit farther offshore and more toward British Columbia at that time. But this at least signals a bit of a pattern change. So what do we see out of this? Well, over the next 5 days, very, very dry across our western region. With all that moisture, you can kind of just see it targeting this corridor and then sliding down the backside of the deeper trough sitting here. So very, very dry. But then if we look out now with the European model all the way out to the 11th, notice the trajectory change. Can you see it? Now with the moisture basically trying to take aim more on the Pacific Northwest, that at least is an encouraging sign. Now, unfortunately, over the next 10 days, California, we're just dry. We don't get the benefit of this change just yet, but maybe by mid-month, we could start to change things up a little bit for California. Okay, talking about snow, I just want to show you some of those snowfall amounts we will be seeing here as we get up here into parts of British Columbia and Alberta. That the Rocky Mountains in through this area, yeah, that's where our main snow axis will be. So this is not packing anything into, any of the mountains here in parts of Oregon, Washington, really not even too much into Idaho, and certainly not into the Sierra Nevada over the next 10 days. So this is what this pattern is getting us. So my storyline is, when are we breaking this down? Well, week 1, no, we're still going to hang on to that dry pattern. European right, GFS ensemble on the left. What about week 2? We know that the GFS was more aggressive, so you can see that it's bringing in the wetter pattern sooner, but it's not to say that the European isn't doing it. It's just a little bit slower in the progress of that pattern. So we can see that first it's going to take aim here in British Columbia, but we could be sending this drier air further to the south here, and I'm hoping that by mid-month we've actually got this pattern broken down and we're bringing in much more regular precipitation at that time period. Now, at the same time this is all occurring, take a look at the upper level flow here. We notice that we all are featuring during that time period more often than not ridging rather than troughing. So that means at least a change in our temperature pattern will happen as this ridge, see this here, by the 7th, starts to influence our flow here across the Pacific Northwest first. That breakdown may occur right in through here. See, about the 11th, that trough sweeps in and possibly brings in the first decent shot at moisture that we're going to have here in the Pacific Northwest in a while. Now, I don't trust any of the model runs beyond about the 11th or 12th at this point, to be honest with you. I think they're struggling with what's happening here over northern parts of Canada, stretching towards Siberia, and I think that is kind kind of exacerbating the high over low pattern we're seeing here. So this is not a slam dunk in a forecast, but I do believe we do get some pattern change by the 10th, 11th, 12th of this month that could be bringing in more moisture to the Pacific Northwest. Now here's the benefit of this pattern, okay? We've been locked into that cold air. I don't have any good news for Montana, but I do have better news for parts of the Pacific Northwest. Over the next 5 days, slowly starting to see temperatures rebound. Days 6 through 10, now we can really see the influence of that ridge sitting more, well, something more like this, with the trough sitting here, dragging that colder air down with it on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains. And even out to days 11 through 15, great multi-model support here from the GFS ensemble and the European, showing you the temperature pattern differences. So we could go back over to much more normal weather here in terms of our temperature patterns, maybe even at times warmer than average as we move toward mid-month. But east side of the Rocky Mountains, very, very cold. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this forecast video. Over the weekend, I will be researching what this pattern looks like for week 3 and week 4. That would be the end of the month of November, to see if we do get any sort of a substantial change. But I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again next week. Thank you.